Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more of the Great War, and this time on to week 163. The Fall of Riga, 11th Battle of the Isonzo River. Yay. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. There's really nothing to add at the beginning of this. Y'all already know my thoughts on the Isonzo River. Fall of Riga, feel like that's not too important of a city. I mean, it'll be probably the furthest the Germans have ever pushed into Russian land, but we already know what's going to happen with the Russians. Anyways, let's dive in.
The Central Powers had taken a few capital cities and major regional capitals, but not for quite a while. That changes this week, though.
That's why it's important. That makes sense.
Far to the north with the fall of Riga. I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. There was action at Verdun, on the Bain-Sitsa Plateau, and on the Black Sea last week, but also a lot of action away from the field as the counter-revolutionary Moscow State Conference was held. Here's what followed. Well, as I said, the fall of Riga followed. That city, at the mouth of the Dwina River on the Baltic coast, had long been an objective of the Germans, but it had been a formidable obstacle. The Russian defenses were on the eastern bank of the river, but they had a strong bridgehead on the western one, and the river itself was nearly half a kilometer wide here. German General Oskar von Hutier now launched his attack. He had 750 big guns and 550 mortars, but he also had the brilliant artillery officer Georg Bruchmüller, who was known as Durch Bruchmüller, the guy for breaking through anything, guiding them. Now, he had come up with a system of quick, intense bombardment that left defenses too stunned to respond when the main attack was launched. The plan was to use 75% gas shells and 25% high explosive ones. The region would be saturated with gas, which meant the Russians would have to all put on masks, which would reduce their ability to do anything else. And communication centers would be destroyed by high explosives, thus blinding Russian command and isolating it from events. Hutier was also using stormtroop tactics with specialist assault squads. They were mostly armed with light machine guns, hand grenades, and flamethrowers, and they were to bypass centers of resistance and break through to attack gun batteries and headquarters. Heavy guns and follow-up infantry would mop up what they had passed. But with the river in the mix, they were also trained in amphibious operations and could establish bridgeheads so that engineers could set up pontoon bridges. At 4 a.m. September 1st, the barrage began, and it worked wonders. Russian guns were silenced, and much of the Russian infantry abandoned its posts in terrors. The river crossing that followed, beginning at 8:30, didn't face much opposition. The Russians fell back, and their front line would stabilize around 30 kilometers northeast of Riga as the Germans took the fourth largest city in Russia with relative ease. On the 6th, the Kaiser himself came to Riga to review the troops. Russia was still having a lot of problems at home, too. There was the growing popularity and power of the Bolsheviks to deal with. Reporter John Reed says that many of the army officers prefer a defeat to Germany over Bolshevism. Army Commander Lev Kornilov now summoned 4,000 officers and promised to hang every last Bolshevik. Prime Minister Alexander Kerensky visited the front and promised several generals that soon he will create a directory that will assume military control of the country. Kornilov agrees with the idea of a military dictatorship, just with one change: leave out Kerensky. Kerensky, thinking Kornilov is in agreement with him, asks Kornilov to send a cavalry corps to Petrograd, but Kornilov hesitates. Kerensky realizes in a couple of days that everything is not exactly hunky-dory between them, and then Kornilov demands that Kerensky reassign his army to Petrograd. Kerensky refuses, and the week ends with the usual complete chaos in the Russian government.
God damn it, Russia.
There was a bit of chaos in the French government as well this week, too. Prime Minister Alexandre Ribot dismissed Interior Minister Louis Malvy, and in response, his whole government resigned. He himself will not leave government, but becomes foreign minister in new Prime Minister Paul Ponlevé's government that is established next week. There was fighting in France in the field this week. The Canadians were still holding on at Lens, surrounded by nests of Germans and pretty continuous fire. They attacked the night of the 3rd, taking 250 meters from the Germans on half a kilometer front. Also, on the 6th, British Columbian troops captured a 300-meter row of houses occupied by 4 companies of Germans. So you can see that the micro-fighting of the war continued day after day, even without major offensives. Of course, there were major offensives underway as well. On the Italian front, the 11th Battle of the Isonzo River was still in progress, with heavy fighting on the Bainsizza Plateau and from Monte San Gabriele. The Italian storming of the mountain came September 3rd, and the London Times described it so. The Italians went forward in 3 columns. One column attacked straight along the crest, one worked along the northeastern slope, while the third advanced on the right. The left-hand column kept the Austrians in this sector very busy and diverted their attention. The right-hand column performed the main service for the other flank of the main attack, which was brilliantly successful. Nothing could stop the center column. They broke down all resistance. They stormed the machine gun positions, careless of loss, and reached the caverns. In less than an hour, the Italians were in possession of the main peak. Another bonus for the Italians was on the Bainsizza Plateau. Some Austrian positions had been abandoned with such haste that they had left behind whole wagons of arms and munitions, which the Italians were happy to retrieve. And one big offensive was coming to an end in Romania, the Battle of Marășești. On the 3rd, a Romanian and Russian attack made little progress for heavy losses, and both sides then adopted a defensive posture along the front, though there were local clashes. On September 5th, Romanian volunteer and heroine Ekaterina Teodoru was killed leading her platoon, and on the 8th, German General Karl von Wenninger will be killed by artillery fire.
Ooh.
By virtually all accounts, the Battle of Marășești was a Romanian success. Yet Martin Gilbert claims kind of the reverse, and that the Germans took 18,000 prisoners, which I can't find corroborated anywhere. Teodoru was originally a nurse, but began fighting on the front lines last October. Captured in November, she escaped by killing her German guard. In action again, she was wounded by artillery and sent to hospital. Upon her release, she was decorated and promoted and given her platoon command. Von Wenninger was a decorated Generalleutnant, Lieutenant General, one of the highest German general ranks in the German army, who had commanded the defenses in Flanders, Arras, and the Somme during the war until his death. Those armies weren't the only people working on defense, though. At sea, the Allied adoption of the convoy system as defense against German submarines had slowly been introduced, and was a pretty complex operation to get going. For example, it required constant vigilance so ships either didn't collide with other ships or lose touch with the whole convoy. And that's pretty tricky if you're steaming along at night with no lights. Convoy has added many new duties. Signals have assumed an importance in the navigation. Failure to read a hoist correctly may result in instant collision. We have need of all eyes on the bridge. We have now to keep close watch on the guide ship and fret the engineer to the adjustment of the speed that keeps him permanently at the levers. But the hard work was paying off. By the end of this month, 83 convoys had arrived in Britain, totaling 1,306 ships. Only 18 ships had been sunk, and 8 of those had dropped out of their convoy. Only 2 ships had been sunk in 55 outward-bound convoys. German U-boats suddenly found the ocean empty, too, since a tightly packed convoy was only a little more visible than a single ship. So you now had one thing moving through the sea instead of a dozen or more separate targets. And even when they did find a convoy, it was really risky to try to down a ship, since it was protected by destroyers and depth charges. So the rate at which Allied shipping was being sunk was dropping sharply, and the rate at which U-boats were being sunk was rising. It looked like Britain was not going to be starved out of the war after all.
Yep.
Though the Germans were trying from the skies as well. On the 3rd, 6 German planes bombed Sheerness. 132 people were killed, 96 injured. On the 4th came a raid on London and the southeast counties, with 19 killed and 71 injured. That same day, 4 Americans were killed in an air raid on a British base hospital in France, the first American Army personnel to die in France during the war. And on September 6th, American General John Pershing moved the American headquarters from Paris to Chaumont. French President Raymond Poincaré came to inspect the troops that day. He was not impressed. Neither was Pershing. It would take time, especially when U.S. Secretary of War Newton Baker said that no Americans would go anywhere near the front until they were fully trained and ready. Georges Clemenceau pointed out that nobody was ever fully ready for this, and France was exhausted and needed help. And that was the week. Fighting in Italy and Romania, convoys at sea, a new French government, and the fall of Riga. Another notch in the German lipstick case. Would the Russians keep retreating? Would the Germans march on Petrograd? For all the chaos there, at least Russia was still in the war, and at least some of the army was still willing to fight. If Petrograd falls, if Russia falls, then what would that mean for the Allies? Only time will tell. If you want to learn more...
And that was the fall of Riga, the 11th battle of the Isonzo River, the Great War, week 163. There was nothing to say during this video. It was just a bunch of things happening, or there really wasn't anything to deep dive about or really expand upon. We've talked plenty about how the U.S. Army before on this channel. How really the U.S. Army does not get its shit together really until World War II. This is the only other time where I'd say the U.S. Army was capable would be during the U.S. Civil War, and perhaps the Spanish-American War, maybe, and also the Mexican-American War. But I don't know how, like, both Mexico and the U.S. military probably a bit of a mess at that point in time. So, like, is it really saying much for when the U.S. fought that war? But anyways, yeah, there really wasn't much to go off here. Hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.